Hi everyone, we are looking at doing some revision on paper one this week, on the whole paper actually, from questions 1 to 5. So first of all, we're going to look at a top answer for question 2, which was on the hardtop piece of writing, the van and the family and Alice being kicked out of the van, that one. So you might want to have that text with you if you've got it. It doesn't matter if not, you'll be able to follow the lesson. Analyze a student's piece of work for structure and language, and learn how to write a very simple but very effective description, because I think that's where you really need to pick up some marks, is on that question 5 of paper 1. And we're going to give you some really simple tips to get better marks there. So I'm going to show you 2 examples from the hardtop question 2, which the question was, how does the writer use language to describe the family? Now, the first student, student A, just sticks to the physical appearance, but student B looks beyond that physical appearance and relates it to their personalities. They sort of looked at the piece as a whole, but I'll show you what I mean as we go through. So student A, the writer uses language in this section by using words like angular and starved, which is suggesting they are hungry and starving, and it makes me think that the family is actually quite poor. He's also used the adjective squeezed to show how Alice was sitting squashed up in the car. This shows there wasn't a lot of space, which means the van must be quite small, considering it's a van, and normally vans have enough space. Now, that's okay. It's not a great answer. It would get some marks, but it hasn't really analysed. It's told us what angular means and what squeezed means, but it hasn't really related it to the piece as a whole. If I show you what I mean, because we can see that the family are angular and starved. Possibly they haven't got enough to eat. Possibly they're quite poor. But we also know that the family are actually quite starved emotionally, you might say. So I've added this bit on. It could also suggest that the family are mean and devoid of human warmth and life. Oops, sorry. Perhaps due to the hardship they've endured. Their emotional lives are as starved as their physical bodies. And then the second point, he also uses the adjective squeezed to describe how Alice was sitting squashed up in the car. This shows there's not a lot of space, which means the van must be quite small, considering it's a van, and normally vans have enough space. Now, I've added, this might also suggest Alice is dominated by Hardtop, who's taking up most of the space in the van. Her personality has been overpowered by him to the point that her own feelings count for nothing. So I've really kind of extended that to talk about how she's sort of emotionally squeezed as well. So we've gone beyond the physical appearance. Student B, this is a real answer, which got top marks. So I think it's quite good if we read this, because it's not very long. They've only actually analysed 2 points, but they've done it so well that they got top marks. I think actually an 8. So I'll just read through it. The writer uses the metaphor of the Hardtop's faces being moulded in clay. The use of this metaphor describes a stoic, uninviting, dull family reflected in the clay mould they have been shaped from. Much like the dullness and texture of clay, the features of the family are lifeless and unchanged. This description displays to the reader the impression of defined features on a dull, colourless palette, showing a boring rigidity of the family. So they've really gone to town there on this metaphor of clay. And really thought, well, what does that mean? It might mean they look a bit, about like the colour of clay, or that their features are set, but it really digs into what a boring, dull family they are. And then they've picked up on the colour of clay. The colour imagery from clay is continued as a flat Swede colour is reflected off the faces. The adjective flat displays a shapeless object, emphasising the normality of the family, whilst also referring to a flat drink. The reader can associate this family lacking fizz of life and also almost inanimate. The adjective Swede colour is a tinged yellow with reference to the tasteless vegetable of a Swede, and the reader is left with an image of a pasty-looking family. So again, they've really gone to town. They've talked about what they look like, so they're all a bit yellow looking, but they've really associated this with their personalities and really picking up on this word flat. So they're all, haven't got any fizz in their lives. They're kind of quite boring. I think that's really what got them the points. So look beyond the obvious. If it's asking you to describe something, a physical thing, well, think how does that fit into the piece as a whole? Yeah, we know this family look like clay, but we also know that they've got quite a dull, colourless life. Okay, so I need you now to read this and pay attention to the points that I've highlighted. Um, it's what you did again. It's what you did in an assignment. It's writing a description suggested by this photograph. And what I want you to do is read through this and just notice these points here. Notice how short it is, how simple the story is, the variation in sentence length, the variation in the way the sentences are started, the use of structure, how it begins and ends, the use of vocabulary, and the use of the detail that really paints a picture. And also notice that it maintains an even tone throughout. So it's very short, as you can see. I've just got some questions here for you to think about. And if you're at home, you could put your answers in the chat and I will comment on them. Okay. So I think hopefully what you got from that is that you don't need to write a complex piece to do well. So we're going to try and mimic some of those skills now. And I want you to look at this picture, first of all, and think about the tone. What is the tone of this picture? If you had to describe the tone, is it happy, sad, lonely, eerie? That word eerie we keep coming back to. Have a think about that. I mean, I would argue that it's got quite an eerie tone to it. And the important thing is to stick to that tone throughout. Don't put jolly similes in, which happens sometimes. People think of a simile that's really good, but it doesn't quite fit with the tone of the piece. So jot down as many words as you can to describe this scene. You might, keeping the same tone. Look at all of the picture, use your senses. What can you hear, smell, see, touch? Maybe look down, look up. What can you see in the sky? Or imagine what you could see in the sky. Imagine what you could see on the ground if you wanted to. Think of some nice similes or metaphors or personification or some nice adjectives or verbs. Just jot down any words that occur to you. So I came up with bony gnarled fingers stretching to the sky to describe the tree. The roundabout sat like a squat spider. So I think that's quite appropriate for the roundabout because it is a children's toy, a children's game, but it's looking a bit spidery and sinister in this piece, I would argue. Now, don't overdo it. What happens is you all think of some brilliant words and put them all in one sentence. And what happens is you lose the sort of flow and the meaning of the sentence. So, for example, here, the bare, gnarled, ancient branches groaned eerily in the uninviting, unforgiving cold wind. There's too much going on there. You've got far too many words, and you kind of lose the main point of it. Similarly here, the rusty old swing creaked loudly in the lonely abandoned park. You might think, brilliant, I've got loads of adjectives and adverbs in there when you have, but it's kind of not, we're losing something because you're cramming too much in. It hasn't got the same impact. So have a little look at that and think about which words you might lose. If I did this, you might have done something differently. I put the gnarled branches groaned in the unforgiving wind, which I think has more impact. We don't need, because we're saying the wind's unforgiving, we're kind of implying that it's cold and unpleasant and uninviting. We don't need to say uninviting and cold as well. Gnarled to me again implies that the branches are bare, they are ancient. I mean, you could have put the gnarled ancient branches. It's not the end of the world to have two adjectives, but I'd say no more than that really. The rusty swing creaked in the lonely park. Again, I've got rid of old because I think if a swing's rusty, we know it's old. We don't need to know that it creaked loudly. It creaked. That's the noise. And lonely and abandoned kind of mean the same thing. You could have chosen either. I quite like the idea of a park being lonely Makes me feel quite sad because they're supposed to be full of life and excitement. Okay, so another thing that happens is you don't vary your sentences very much. So if you look at this, we've got the playground was cold and foggy, the swings and roundabout were abandoned, and all the children had gone home. The trees stretched their bare branches skyward. There's a lot of they all start with the, and they're a similar kind of sentence. You start with an object, the playground was, the swings were, the trees did this. You get marks on the variety of your sentences, so please try and vary them. There's some ideas here of how to do that. So say we had the sentence, the playground was chilly and foggy. I think it's quite important to try and put yourself in that picture instead of just describing it as an outsider. I think it really helps if you're in it, because it really helps you almost interact with a picture, and that way actually varying your sentences is a little bit easier. So think about how you were affected by this fog. A chilly finger of fog began to curl around my neck. You could start with a joining word. As I wandered through the playground, a chilly fog began to descend. Start with an ing word. This is quite a good technique. Shivering. I pulled up my collar against the chilly fog. Start with a preposition. Now this means behind. You could say where something is. You're describing where something is. So here we've got beyond the trees. A chilly fog began to descend. You could say beyond, behind, in front of, in the distance. Anything like that's quite helpful. A shroud of chilly fog hovered above the playground. So there we've started with a metaphor. And then the last one, we just started with a simile. Silent as the grave, the chilly fog crept around me. So there's a few ideas there for varying your sentences. Have a go at that. Use one of the techniques above to try and rewrite this sentence. The trees were bare and dark. So I've started with cautiously, I approached the bare, dark trees. So I put myself in that picture and sort of described how I'm approaching the trees. Now what I want you to do is plan your own piece of writing. Keep it simple. I'd say no more than 2 characters. Put yourself in the picture so you're interacting with your surroundings. Vary your sentence starters. Don't start all your sentences in the same way. Use descriptive language, but not too much. Try and keep to the eerie, sinister tone of the piece. Use your senses. If you get stuck, look up and down, the crackle of leaves underfoot, the pale moon shining through the fog. And keep it short. If you keep it short, you have time to go back and change and improve things. If you're rushing to finish your story, you're not going to have time and you're going to have loads of typos. So there's an assignment in the classroom for you to do that. So I would like you please to finish that off for homework.